Yesterday, Nan, Austin, and I we went north of Nashville for a wedding. Actually, many of you know Scott Kelly, the worship leader that's been here a couple of times doing concerts here. His daughter got married. And while I was there at the reception, actually, I got a text from Bertie saying, War Eagle, and who won? I'm sorry, who won? Oh, War Eagle! War Eagle! Oh. Hey, War Eagles in Alabama. Let's just not forget that. Alabama won, right? Alabama won. Whether you Alabama folk like it or not, Auburn is in Alabama. Hey, just a couple of things just to share with you. Tonight, in Celebrate Recovery, we've got Alabama State Rep coming to talk to us about sanity. And that's at 5 p.m. Rick Piper will be out here to talk about sanity. And I was mentioned earlier, so what a great time to, in this busy, insanely busy season, a great time to talk about sanity. So I challenge you, invite you to come out, 5 o'clock. Come out for our dinner, 4:15. It's taco soup. And 4:15, we'd love to have you. Stick around and enjoy the fellowship. I don't think you would be disappointed. That's 4:15 dinner, 5 o'clock is our Celebrate Recovery. If you have a veteran in your family that maybe he or she was not in our veteran service a couple weeks ago, we still have 5 gift cups that we'd like to put in the hands of veterans. If you have a veteran in your family, we're just, you can see Judy afterwards. We'll give them to the first 5 folks that come knocking on her door, and we'll gladly surrender them to you. The youth are doing their Christmas card fundraiser again this year. In case you don't know, each year the youth will take your stack of Christmas cards that you give out to, or send out to the local congregation here, and they will hand deliver them for the cost of the state. And that's basically what it is. You just give them a stack of cards and what it would cost to mail you, put it on a check or cash, give it to Bo or Tiffany, and it's just an easy, simple way for the youth to raise some money. They need the cards. They need your cards by December 13th so that they can hand deliver them on December 17th. Okay, so December 13th, get those to them. And I have a thank you card here somewhere. You know what, Jan? I left your thank you card in my office. Jan sent a card to the church, just thanking you all for the food. And I know, let me take that opportunity. Teresa Bangla, where are you at? Oh, Teresa's nurse. Teresa is kind of taking it on herself to make sure that folks that are recuperating from surgeries or procedures or convalescing, just to make sure that she lines up food for them. And I sure do appreciate that, and I know you do as well. And so if Teresa tags you or asks you, or you know somebody that is home and you want to help, just see Teresa. I know she'd love to get you on that schedule of helping out. But Jan and James just wanted to thank you all for your cards, for your prayers, for the food, and just being the family that you are. And that's what we are famous for. We are known for our love, as we should be. Anything else? What am I missing? I think that's it.
I've got one.
Yes, ma'am.
The kids have a big month coming up. December the 9th, they are, and it's not just kids. We're just going to do a marriage chapel float. We're going to be in the Green Hill Christmas Parade on the 9th, the Lexington Christmas Parade on December 10th, and then the St. Joe Parade on the 17th. We have a huge trolley that we're going to ride in. That's just to keep place where we can hang Christmas lights and all of that. The kids, their Christmas party is December the 13th, and then the Christmas play is December the 20th. So instead of service that night, the kids will be doing a Christmas play / Christmas musical. So if anybody wants to help with that, we can use help. But if you want to ride in the parade, please let me know, just so we can make sure we do have enough seats for everybody. You will need to bring your own candy to throw out, but there's plenty of room for anybody who wants to ride.
Well, thank you. Let's worship the Lord.
Okay, so I have something real quick to share. Last week I had made a comment that some of us had had a rough year, but we had so much to be thankful for. Well, I think most everybody knows in July I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. 2 surgeries later, we hit some walls and we're just struggling to get through this thing. So when they told me I had breast cancer, I said, I'll see you in 3 weeks. I'm going to Alaska. Because we only get to see our son maybe once a year. So we went to Alaska, came back, I had the surgeries and everything. I've been doing great, you know, I'm not healed, but I'm doing great. And last Sunday night, I just had one of those pity days, apparently. So I sat in my chair all day long, called my dad and said, I just need to sit here. I don't know why, I just need to sit here. David's been gone off working, so he calls me at 7:30 and we're on the phone and I see these lights come up the driveway and then I hear doors close. And I said, stay with me, there's somebody here. So I go to the back door and I have the storm door locked because, you know, they can't get through the storm door apparently. But I still got David on the phone and I reach and I open up my main door and I say, it's Michael. That's our son. And David says, what? And they're standing in the cold. I haven't opened the other door yet. And I said, it's Michael and Jess. They're here from Alaska. I left them standing out there a while, just in the days apparently. I went to bed that night, and as I laid there, all I could keep saying was, thank you. Thank you, Lord. I really believe if we praise Him, even in the storm, He's all the more anxious to bless us even more. It's been an awesome week, Howard. I had my kid here for 5 days. Praise Him even in the storm. God is good. Let's worship.
My life is in you, Lord, my strength
So the next song is Here I Am to Worship. Is that why you're here, Bonnie? Amen. We are here to worship. Let's sing it like we mean it. Thanksgiving. Got to spend time with family. If nothing else good has happened this week, you had a good Thanksgiving. You're able to be here today. The sun is shining. It is a beautiful day. There's so much to be thankful for, and I keep saying that. It's just true, though. It's just true. And the longer you serve Him, I promise you, the sweeter He'll grow. Sin Every
No children's church this morning, so stay put. As we go to the Lord in prayer this morning, we want to remember Lois, of course, and Jan. We're so thankful that you are back and you're healthy, you're feeling better. Teresa asked prayer for her granddaughter Sophie. She's been having some real ear issues and hoping to get that resolved this week. And just before the service started, I was told about Bridget, who had some sort of a reaction last night, some sort of allergic reaction. They still don't really know what's going on. I think they're taking her somewhere today to try to get some answers, try to maybe get to see an allergist. But she was, I know it scared the family a great deal. So we want to remember that whole family. Let's go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, I just thank you for your presence. Lord, I know that many folks here are just taking a deep breath. Thanksgiving, Black Friday behind us, and the busiest part of the season ahead of us. Lord, I'm constantly wanting to remind us. I'm constantly wanting to remind us. I'm constantly wanting to remind us to take note of why we are here. As Judy said, if we have not come here to worship, we ought not be here. That's what worship is. That's what church is about. It's about worshiping you. It's about casting our cares, our burdens, and concerns, and our praises upon your altar. Because you're worthy. Father, we lift up those who are especially burdened this morning. Burdened physically, relationally, burdened emotionally. Mostly those, Lord God, that are struggling spiritually. And I know there are many in our midst. Father, I pray that this would be, just as the Advent means the arrival, that this would be the advent of a new beginning, a new journey, a refreshed commitment and dedication to you and to worship. Only when we place ourselves under your authority, when we recognize your sovereign authority over us, do we truly understand the art and the act of worship. I pray, Father, that you'd be with us today as we look at the rise and the fall of King Solomon. I pray, Father, that many of us would see many of ourselves, or at least some of ourselves, in what took place there. And Father, may we commit ourselves today to rectifying those things and turning that around. And we'll give you glory and honor in Christ's name. Amen. Before I get into my message, I wasn't even going to share this till I thought of something after I was talking to Brunel this morning. I sent out a devotion the other morning. Saturday morning I was in the deer stand with Bo, and I took a picture of the sunrise. It was just a beautiful sunrise. And it dawned on me that, we only ever comment on the sun. We only comment on how beautiful the sunrise is when it's cloudy. Because that's the only time you really see the sun. Or, out on the beach and you see the reflection on the water. It's the only time you see the sun. It's the only time you really comment on how beautiful it is. And in my devotion, I made the point that, in the same way, nobody sees Jesus, the Son Jesus, unless he's reflected off of us. Nobody comments. Nobody's drawn to Christ when they don't see Christ in the world. And then this morning, and Vernell reminded me of that devotion, and another thought came to my mind. I said, it's funny. The sun is most beautiful when it's cloudy. And isn't that a truth in itself? Christ is most beautiful in our times of trial, in our times of suffering. And Vernell, the reason I shared that is because after that I was reminded of something else that took place back on Veterans, at the Loretta High School Veterans program. I was there with James and with Charles and Greg. And I'm sitting behind this man, this elderly gentleman, bald on top. I just got up and smacked him on the head. And you think, how many of you can say that? I just got up, I popped him on the back of the head, and he thanked me. I was watching this wasp. As the program is going on, this wasp is just flying around. And I you know what? I'm told not to hate anything. I dislike them. I loathe them. Okay? I'm watching this wasp, and doggone it, that wasp didn't land right on that bald guy's head. And I got up and I swatted the wasp, and he startled, and I think your dad was more startled than he was. And I just whispered, because the program was going on. Everybody behind me saw me, I'm sure. I whispered, I said, "Wasp." Thank you very much. I said, "You're welcome." So see, good things happen in trials. We have a reason to give thanks in our trials. So the next time you get hit on the back of your head, thank God. That's a good thing. That was free. That didn't cost you anything. You don't even have to put extra in the plate for that, okay? All right. One of the saddest stories in the whole Bible of falling from grace is the story of King Solomon. I mean, think about all that King Solomon had. He was the son of the greatest king of Israel. He was wholly devoted to God. And because of that devotion, he was handpicked by God to build God's temple. He was the richest and the wisest man on the planet Earth. He had all this going from all of Israel, enjoyed a peace they had not experienced in over 500 years since Israel first went into Egypt. Had all this going for them. How many of you would just like to experience that? Just slip into Solomon's shoes for one day to experience that kind of lavish lifestyle of the rich and famous. I think it would kind of be fun for a day, don't you? I'm just confessing. I'm being honest.
You go back.
Pardon me?
You go back.
And then go back. No. You can stay there. Okay. He had it all. But then something happened. Something snapped in Solomon. And his whole kingdom started crumbling around him. And eventually, after his death, his kingdom was torn in two. Now, many of us know the story of Solomon and how he had this unhealthy attraction for women. At his highest point, or his lowest point, however you want to look at it, he had some 700 royal wives in his harem, plus 300 porcupines. That's supposed to be a drum roll there. Matt, where were you? He had 700 wives plus 300. Today we would call them common law wives. They weren't really his wives, but that's the responsibility, that's the role they played. 1,000 women that he had to answer to every single day he went home from a long day at the office. How do he do it? And at the risk of any of you getting word back down to Nan and putting me in hot water, I'm just going to leave it right there. You all can finish that the way you want to finish it. I'm done. But this morning, I want to look over the course of his life, since he was crowned king. And I want to look for some hints, some red flags that help us understand how a man who was born to such riches could die in such rags. And for the record, your bulletin has it the other way around. That's my fault. That wasn't Judy's. I just gave her the wrong information. It is from riches to rags. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading and a lot of noting this morning. If you have your Bibles, it's really going to help because it's not going to be, most of it's not going to be up behind me. And so I'm going to be starting in 1 Kings chapter 8. If you want to find your way there, 1 Kings chapter 8, that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, 1 Kings. Find your way there, and we're going to look at this prayer of dedication. Now, the prayer of dedication that Solomon prayed was following the building of the temple, and they were getting ready to dedicate the temple to God, and God was getting ready to move into the temple. I want to first look at Solomon's devotion to God. And to do that, I'm not going to read this whole dedication. In fact, all I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first paragraph and the last paragraph. But understand, this whole prayer is a prayer of devotion. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 23, he says, Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven and on earth, or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it as it is today. And then picking it up, verse 56, Praise be to the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands as at this time. Now it's obvious that Solomon was truly like his father David, a man after God's own heart. And throughout the first part of Solomon's reign, he ruled with wisdom and with truth, and he never forgot from where that wisdom and truth came from. But as I said, something snapped. Something happened in Solomon's life that changes drastically. And so I want to look at Solomon's destruction. Turn over a couple of pages to 1 Kings chapter 11. I'm going to read the first 13 verses. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led them astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the god of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. Verse 7. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you've not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I'll not do it during your lifetime. I'll tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I'll not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Like I said, Solomon was a lover of women. And he had a wandering eye, and especially for foreign women. Scripture says that he loved them, and over time he allowed them to turn his heart toward their gods and away from the one true God. And verse 4 of what I just read, verse 4, it says, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. He even went so far as to build altars to these detestable gods. Now, in Bible language, Solomon committed what we call idolatry. Idolatry. He broke the first two of the 10 Commandments handed down to Moses. He didn't just break them, though. He broke them in two. He snapped them in four. He trampled on them. He ran his chariot over them and then backed up on them again. He just ripped them to shreds. He just rebuked. He just cast his commandments aside. Well, let's look at the gods for just a moment. Let's look at the gods that he lists here, of whom Solomon followed. In verse 5, it says that he followed Ashtoreth. Now, the word follow means worship. He didn't just build these for his foreign wives. It says he followed them. His heart was turned toward them. He worshipped them. But who is Ashtoreth? Ashtoreth was the goddess of love, but she's more popularly known as the female counterpart to Baal. Now, Baal is known as the god of life. In fact, the name Baal means Lord, Master. He's the same God whose followers had a showdown with Elijah on Mount Carmel. Baal was not a good guy. But like I said, not only did he build the altars to Baal's female counterpart, he worshipped her. But now she wasn't the only one. In verse 5, he mentions another god, the god Moloch, the god of the Ammonites. He demanded worship. He demanded sacrifice from his people. Now, what kind of sacrifice did he demand? Well, we go. You don't have to go there. It's written in your bulletin, I think. Leviticus 18:21. You can look at it later. It says, "Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of your Lord your God." So Moloch demanded of the Ammonites and eventually the Israelites that they sacrifice their children to keep peace with him. And they did that by throwing their children into the fire pit outside of the city of Jerusalem and burning them. The other god here that's listed here in verse 7 is Chemosh. He's the God of the Ammonites. And in 2 Kings 3:27, he too demanded sacrifice of children. Here's my point. These three gods were not just three little gods. They were not minor gods. They were chief pagan gods whom Solomon worshipped and rebelled against the one true God. How many of you ever heard the name Margaret Sanger before? Margaret Sanger has the distinction of having come up with a method of killing off the black race in inner cities. The method that she had created was called Planned Parenthood. Yes, that Margaret Sanger. Solomon building an altar to the likes of Ashtoreth and Moloch and Chemosh would be akin to me building an altar to Satan and to Margaret Sanger. He did evil in the sight of God. In my July 4th message a couple of years ago, I made the point that it was this point in the lives of the Israelites, the turning point where they were killing their children, that God said enough is enough. And He removed His hand of providence and protection from them. And I also made the point then that our nation's embracing of the abortion industry may very well be the turning point where God says to us, enough is enough, and removes His hand of providence and protection from America. But now we understand how devoted Solomon was to God when we look at that prayer of dedication in 1 Kings 8. We also understand how far from grace that he fell into wickedness. But what we've yet to do is we've yet to make the connection. How did he go from the saintly son to this Satan's son? How did he fall so far? Well, that's what I want to spend the remainder of our time looking at we went from one extreme to the other by looking at Solomon's demise. Now, you're just going to have to follow with me because I'm going to be rattling from 1 Kings chapter 2 right on through chapter 10, and just follow along with me. It's just a couple of pages at a time, but I want to show you some red flags. They're at least red flags for me, and how Solomon went from grace to the grave. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 2, let me read that for you, if I can get back to it here. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 2, David was giving his charge to Solomon. He says, I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. Be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to Him and keep His decrees and commands, His laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Okay, stop there. Did Solomon keep God's commandments? No, he broke one commandment just by marrying outside of his faith. Not once, but 1,000 times. Look at verse 13. In verse 13, we have the introduction or the reintroduction of Solomon's older brother Adonijah. Adonijah had went to his stepmother, Bathsheba, Solomon's mom, to make a request to King Solomon. He wanted to marry Abishag. And so Bathsheba approached her son, the king, and said, I want to make a request, and not only do I want to beg for Adonijah's life, I also want to ask for permission for him to marry. Now, before that, when Bathsheba approached Solomon, she said, I have a request to make. And Solomon, being the obedient son that he was, says, Mother, I'll do anything for you. I would not refuse you anything. But then when she asks for permission for Adonijah to marry Abishag, he just flew off the handle. Here's how he responded in verse 22 and verse 23. King Solomon answered his mother, Why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. Now, I want you to understand what's going on here. First of all, who Abishag was. Abishag was the beautiful attendant and housekeeper for his father, King David, in his old age. And so Solomon saw that request as yet another attempt on the part of his older brother to take the throne. He figures if he has his dad's woman, then he had a right to the throne as well. So let's not just cover over that. Adonijah was a bad dude, and he caused a lot of trouble for his dad. And so I don't want us to think that Solomon was some sort of sadistic killer. But what I want us to look at is his total lack of emotion, and total lack of mercy, and total lack of compassion. He spoke almost boastfully of killing his own flesh and blood. Not only did he not have any mercy and compassion for his oldest brother, I'm sure that by this time that his own mom had some sort of a relationship with her stepson. Surely he would have shown her some compassion, maybe pull her aside and explain to her why he's so angry, why he's so spiteful. But there was absolutely no emotion whatsoever. Flag number 1. In chapter 3, we see what the Lord tells Solomon to ask for anything that you wish, anything you desire, and you will have it. In verse 3 it says, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. Now, if you were to go back to Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, God had already laid the commandment down to Moses that they're not to sacrifice or make offerings anywhere outside of the altar of God. At the temple, or at the time, the tabernacle of God. But here we are, looking here. Here, Solomon is already, and we're just in chapter 3. Solomon is already choosing where and when he'll make offerings and sacrifices. And it says he chose the high places. Well, where did we already say that he built the altars for Moloch? Up in the high places. Could this be the beginning? Could this be the beginning that led him from offering his sacrifices to God to offering his sacrifices to Moloch? Flag number 2. In chapter 4, let me read verses 22 and 23. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tiphsah to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree. Now, maybe this is a petty thing. Maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe you even think I'm picking on Solomon. obviously, I don't think he ate all of these things every day. Obviously, I know that he had a whole band, a royal band of followers that were eating meals with him. But even still, does this seem just a tad bit excessive to you? That that his daily provisions would consist of all of this? Maybe not. We're not going to flag that right now. We're just going to set this over here for just a couple of minutes, and we'll get back to it. Let's move on. At the very end of chapter 6, the very last verse of chapter 6, we have Solomon having completed building God's temple, God's house. And it says that he spent 7 years building God's house. Now, elsewhere it says it took him over 180,000 workers. 7 years. That had to have been some kind of place. And it was. If you look at chapters 5 and 6, and the description of the temple is just incredible. But now I want you to look at the very next verse. The first verse in chapter 7. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. Did you see that? Did you catch that? It took him almost twice as long to build his own house, whom God did not command him to build, as it did to build God's house. And if God's house is as extravagant as it's described here, how much more extravagant is Solomon's own house? And then in verse 8, it also says that he built a palace for his Egyptian wife as well, the Pharaoh's daughter. We're going to give that one 2 flags, 3 and 4. Next, I want you to look at chapter 8. Flip over a page or two to chapter 8. Look what Solomon says after the priests placed the temple placed the ark into the temple. In verse 13, this is Solomon now. He says, "I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever." Are we starting to see a little pride? Are we starting to see a problem, an issue about me? I have indeed built a magnificent place for you. I wonder if God is starting to notice that as well. In chapter 9, the Lord begins. He's telling Solomon what to do, what not to do. In verse, hang on a second. The Lord appeared, beginning in verse 6. The Lord tells him what? He says, "Don't worship other gods. Don't bow down to other gods." Are you thinking that maybe God knows something that we don't about Solomon? That God is already seeing these chinks in his armor? Here's the big one. Chapter 10. I'm not going to read it. But it describes the visit by the Queen of Sheba to Solomon. And it appears that Solomon is giving the queen a personal guided tour of everything. His palace, his stables, all of his riches, his wealth. And the queen is absolutely enamored. She's just without words of how magnificent it all is. And at one point, the queen even gives God credit, saying how great he must be for putting you in charge here. It's a great thing. I want to ask you a question. If God made you the wisest and the richest man or woman in all the world, and you could have anything you wanted, all you had to do was ask. Don't you think that if someone was praising you for your good fortune, don't you think that at some point you would give credit to God for whence it came? You know what? In all of chapter 10, In all of chapter 10, we're looking for that. We're looking for how Solomon is trying to lead the queen to hurt his God. Looking for, hey, you know, it's right. It's real nice. I won't deny that. But look, I had nothing to do with it. It was all God. Nowhere do you find that. Nowhere do you find God getting any credit whatsoever for all that he had done for Solomon. It was all about Solomon. Flag number 6. Finally, I want to just real quickly in chapter 10, look at verses 14 and 15. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. There's a strange number, isn't it? Not including the revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the territories. 666 talents. That's about 4.5 tons of gold that Solomon received every year. That's equivalent in today's value of $252 million that he received each and every year, not including his annual revenues that are listed here. Now, when you couple that with his daily provisions that we put over here, I'm going to go out on a limb here and I'm going to suggest to you that he's living quite the extravagant lifestyle. I'm going to suggest to you that he's no longer the humble king that he had set out to be. The humble servant that he had said in the very beginning in his prayer dedication that he would be. Final point. Now here's my point in sharing those flags. It wasn't just one day that Solomon woke up and said, you know, I think I'm going to go marry 999 other women and take a stroll up the hill and worship a God of killing children. There was a progression or a digression. It didn't start there. It began small. It began with him having no mercy and no compassion for others. It began with him being disobedient or not being obedient to all of God's commands. It began with him focusing more attention, more time, more resources on himself and his own self-gratification than on God. It began with him hoarding more money than he could possibly spend in 100 lifetimes, rather than giving some back to the poor people under his reign who desperately needed it. In fact, if you went on to 1 Kings chapter 12, you'll see that's the very reason the kingdom split between his two sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. One of them was bent on keeping the high taxation that Solomon had instituted. And the other one, he didn't like that. He ran off with the 10.5 of the tribes. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:10, he says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. You know, regardless of whether you acknowledge God today or not, he is the source of everything good in your life. He is the source of everything that you value that is good in your life. And it is only by his grace and his love for you that you're even breathing today. Last week we were talking about true worship and about how we ought to come in here with an attitude of gratitude. You know, as we roll on into this Advent season, what better time to do a checkup from the neck up and ask ourselves seriously and soberly these 4 questions. Number 1, who or what has your devotion in your life? Who or what has my devotion in my life? Number 2, what role does pride play in my life? Number 3, who or what do I value in my life? And finally, number 4, how much appreciation do I show to God for my blessings in my life? I'd like each of us to answer those 4 questions to yourself. Go home, meditate on that. Spend your quiet time answering those 4 questions. Don't put what you think is the right answer. Put what is the real answer. And then make those changes that need to be made. You know, we may not worship Planned Parenthood. We may not worship the devil. But folks, idolatry is every bit as a major part of many of our lives as it was for the Israelites. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that many of you worship more gods than the Israelites ever dreamed of worshiping. The God of money. The God of self. The God of pleasure. The God of slothfulness. Or even the God of materialism. How many altars have you built to foreign gods? Where is your devotion today? There's 2 points I want to make real quickly and we're going to close. Although it seemed that Solomon had it all handed to him on a platter and somehow just went to pot, it all was not his fault. Back in that one passage in 1 Kings chapter 2 where David gives his charge to Solomon, he says, I'm going up on the mountain to be with the dads and you're on your own. He says this, he says, be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. I wonder what kind of a godly example David was for us. Just thinking. You know, sins have consequences. And sometimes those consequences last a very long time. Sometimes they even last for generations. The second point that I want to make with is I don't want us to think too badly or too terribly of Solomon. Yeah, he messed up. He messed up big time. He messed up royally. But the very last words that he is known to have written come out of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, last 2 verses. He says this, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. You know, when he was at the end of his ages and death was looming over his head, it seems that Solomon finally came to his senses. I don't think he ever really forgot that God was watching him. I think he just put it off to the side so that he could follow his own ways, so he could do his own thing, so that he could serve his own gods. My prayer for us, as we enter into this Advent season, my prayer for us is that we not wait till we're on our deathbeds to figure this out. My prayer for us is that we realize we may not even get an opportunity to figure this out. My prayer for us is that we take an honest inventory of our lives, of those things that our hearts are set on, that we're devoted to. And anything that is not in alignment with God, we remove that. Whatever it is, whether it's bitterness, bad attitude, unthankful heart, unhealthy relationship, unhealthy addiction. I could go on till after Olive Garden closes. my prayer is that you will take that inventory of yourself, that you will ask yourself those 4 questions. Take those questions with you. Meditate on them throughout this week as we prepare for the Advent, and just answer those questions. You don't have to come back and tell me what they are. You don't have to give me answers or anybody else, between you and God. But I want you to take those 4 questions and answer them honestly. And then make those changes. Make those changes in your attitude. Make those changes in your journey. Make those changes in your life that aren't in alignment with God. Amen? Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you. Even for the sad fall from grace that you have given us through the life of King Solomon, we give you thanks. Because we understand that it's a journey. We understand that we don't just go from holiness to wickedness in a snap of a finger, but that it's just a little thing that we begin to allow in our lives that are out of alignment with you. That little lie. That little relationship. That little jealousy. That little pleasure. And it just takes on a life of its own. Father, may we back up. May we go back to Thanksgiving and focus on all that is good that you have given us in our lives. And through that spirit of thanksgiving, Lord God, may we make changes that honor you, that please you, that glorify you. And may we remove from our lives those things that do not. Lord, I pray for each person here. I pray that in their quiet time this week, Lord God, that each day for the next 7 days, they would ask themselves those 4 questions. They would ask you those 4 questions. And you would reveal to them the truth. You would reveal to them reality. And show them, Lord God, what things please you and what things don't. I thank you for today, and I thank you for this season. Lord, as we remove ourselves from the building, may we not remove ourselves from your presence. But may your presence go before us, behind us, and beside us as we walk in spirit and in truth. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. We give our ushers step forward. Father in heaven, thank you for your presence today. Thank you for your presence in our worship. Thank you for your presence in our offering. Understanding that this is your offering. That you are getting the very best of what we have. That you are getting our first fruits. You're not getting the leftovers. You're not getting the remnants. You're getting the choicest of what we have to offer. We thank you again for this precious day, for this beautiful day that you've made for us. In Christ's name, amen. find somebody you don't like and just pretend you do. Give them a hug, give them a kiss. And be sure to come back tonight, 4:15 for dinner, 5 o'clock.